Hi, my name is Cindy and the name of my shop is Molasses Creek Woodcraft. Welcome one and all. Today I am sitting in front of 5 slabs of beautiful spalted maple. I really enjoy making things from wood that has a story, and these have a story. I got these slabs from a tree that was being taken down not too far from where I live. This tree had been certified to be one of the largest maple trees in the state of Washington, and I can tell you this tree was enormous for a maple tree. Unfortunately, it had died and it needed to be taken down. I went to where the tree was being cut down and I acquired these 5 slabs along with some burls and some other pieces, and they've been sitting in my shop for almost 5 years now. So it's time to make something beautiful from them. I am going to be making an heirloom keepsake box for my family. I will be putting a lot of emotions and memories into making this keepsake box, so I may not be doing a lot of voiceovers in this video. We'll see how that works out. I don't have plans that I'm working from. I just kind of have this vision in my head. So let's get started and see how it turns out. Hi, it's me. I guess I decided I'm going to do some voiceovers on this video. This first part here, I'm working with the spalted maple, and I'm just using a Sharpie to find some of the prettiest grain in there and just really roughly sketch out some rectangles on the spalted maple slabs that I'm going to want to cut out and mill down. And here I'm just really roughly cutting out the rectangular shapes that I want, not going for any straight edges at this point. And then here's the 4 pieces that I cut out that I'm going to use. So the first step is just to get one flat side on each of the pieces, and I'm going to use a planing sled that I have that's made with 3/4 inch plywood and 3/4 inch MDF, and I know it's flat, so I'm going to use hot glue and glue down the high edges with shims, and once I get everything shimmed, it will lay perfectly flat on that planing sled, and I'll test the corners to make sure it's not rocking back and forth anywhere. That way I know it's perfectly flat on the planing sled. And then I'm going to run each of those through the planer on the planing sled, and that will give me one perfectly flat surface on each of the 4 pieces. And then once I have one perfectly flat surface, I can take them off the planing sled and turn them over and run them through the planer again to get the opposite sides flat, and run all 4 of them through at the same time to make sure they're all a uniform thickness. Okay, the next step is to joint one edge so that you have one perfectly straight edge. Now you can do this on a jointer. You can also joint an edge on a table saw. I happen to have a jig that's a tapering and jointing jig, so I'm going to use my tapering and jointing jig to get one straight edge on each of the 4 pieces. And once I have one perfectly straight edge, I can run that through the table saw to make the opposite edge straight and parallel. Then I can put them on my crosscut sled to get one side perfectly straight and at a 90-degree perpendicular to the first 2. And then I can put the stop block in the crosscut sled and cut them down so that they're all a uniform length. So this is what the 4 box sides look like. We know the sides are flat and parallel and of uniform thickness. We know the edges are straight and parallel and perpendicular. And this is what it looks like after I've mitered the corners. I cut a dado groove in the bottom for a bottom panel and glued them up into my box. Now, since this is spalted wood, I'm going to put an initial coat of wipe-on poly on the box. I want to make sure I get all of that spalted wood nicely sealed before I continue working with it. And this is what it looks like after I have that first coat of wipe-on poly on it. You'll notice I screwed those corners together. That's for structural strength, and that won't show on the final box. Now I'm going to begin milling up a whole bunch of walnut. In this project I used the spalted maple, I used walnut, and I used aromatic cedar. It will all get milled up basically the same way. First rough cutting it, then jointing it and planing it. And then cutting it to size. Now for the trim pieces on the corners of the box, I want them to have a slight taper to them, so I'm using my tapering jig and cutting a 2.5-degree taper on the side pieces. And this is what those trim pieces look like on the corners of the box with the 2.5-degree taper on them. Now this is a piece of really rough aromatic cedar I've had in the shop for quite a while. And I'm first going to get my usable pieces out of that, and then I'm going to mill that up, and we're going to end up with this little tray that's going to fit inside the bigger box. When that's glued up, I'm putting that on my splining jig, and I'm going to cut spline slots in the mitered corners. And when the splines are glued in, I'll get out a flush cut saw and trim the splines off to be flush. Now there were some parts of the project I didn't record, so just to review what we have now. We have the box, we have pieces for the lid, we have the small cedar box, and we have another small walnut box that will fit inside the larger box. Now, I did not record myself sanding everything because probably the only thing more boring than doing the sanding yourself is watching someone else doing the sanding. I sanded everything down to 220 grit, and now I am going to begin applying the first coat of wipe-on poly. After 2 coats of wipe-on poly, I'm going to begin buffing the surface. This is to remove some of the little nubbies that you get when you apply wipe-on poly and to smooth out the surface. There's a couple schools of thought. Some people like using 6,000 or 8,000 grit sandpaper. Some people like to use a brown paper bag. I'm using a piece of leather. This is actually a soft piece of cowhide, and I'm using the back side, the rougher side of the piece of leather. This will buff it out, it will get rid of the little nubbies, and it will leave a nice smooth surface. So for the final assembly, and this is where it gets real personal. Placing the contents in the small walnut box, and I'm screwing the bottom on to that box. And then I'm adding the contents to the small cedar tray. Then the small walnut box goes into the big box. And the cedar tray goes into the big box. And the lid goes on. And we have our final product. You know, as woodworkers, we tend to be our own worst critics. I know it's not perfect. I see where I made mistakes, but it means a lot to my family, and they love it. As always, thank you for watching. I appreciate anyone who takes the time to watch my videos. Have a wonderful rest of your day.